The most dangerous poison is not poured into your glass with a sinister grin. It is offered with kindness, wrapped in smiles, whispered through words of comfort. Jung once warned that evil does not always arrive in the form of violence. Sometimes it enters dressed as care, as sympathy, as an embrace too tight to let you breathe. This is the paradox of what I call toxic kindness, the hidden face of the archetype of chaos. We trust kindness. We lower our defenses before it. When someone offers help, we instinctively step closer. But what if the hand extended to save you is the same hand that chains you? What if the sweetness that soothes your wounds is the same sweetness that infects? Poison works best when it tastes like honey. And in the psyche, kindness can become the sharpest weapon. I recall a patient who suffocated not under blows, but under embraces. Her partner never shouted, never struck her, never left a visible scar. Instead, he wrapped her in affection so constant, so overwhelming, that she lost herself in his orbit. Every decision was for her own good. Every boundary dissolved for the sake of love. And yet, beneath the surface, she was drowning. She had been devoured not by cruelty, but by care. This was not love. This was possession disguised as devotion. Modern psychology confirms this trap. Researchers call it coercive control, the subtle domination where the victim appears free, yet every choice is guided, every breath monitored, every step framed as protection. Neuroscience shows how dependency forms when oxytocin, the hormone of bonding, is twisted into a leash. Science explains the mechanics, but Jung already saw the archetype. When the mask of kindness is fused with the archetype of chaos, what emerges is not compassion, but venom. The ancients knew this too. In Greek mythology, the lotus offered sweetness that enslaved sailors in forgetfulness. In Christian scripture, the serpent did not threaten Eve with violence. It offered wisdom, a gift that became a curse. In Buddhist text, Mara tempts not with terror but with comfort, lulling seekers into sleep rather than awakening. Over and over, wisdom traditions warn, beware the hand that offers too much, for within it may lie your ruin. And the signs are always subtle. Smiles that feel a fraction too heavy, protection that suffocates rather than liberates, affection that demands obedience in return. Each gesture is coated in sweetness, but beneath it lurks the hunger to control. By the time you recognize it, the venom is already in your veins. This is why Jung insisted on consciousness, to see beyond appearances, to strip masks of their charm, to recognize when kindness becomes bondage. For in a world where chaos often walks in disguise, the most lethal chains are forged not from cruelty, but from care. So ask yourself, whose kindness surrounds you? Is it a river that nourishes, or a flood that drowns? Is it a hand that heals, or a hand that binds? And most importantly, when you look into your own heart, is kindness a gift of freedom, or has it too? It begins not with a scream, not with blood, not with the violence of open cruelty. It begins with a smile, a gentle word, a gesture of care so subtle, so warm, that the victim steps closer without hesitation. The most dangerous poison never announces itself with bitterness. It arrives sweet, irresistible, and trusted. This is the archetype I call toxic kindness, the invisible weapon that does not strike, but envelops, that does not wound the body, but corrodes the soul. Jung warned us that archetypes are not only figures in dreams, they are forces in life, currents in the collective unconscious that shape the theater of human existence. And among them lies one forgotten, ignored, dismissed, the archetype of venomous kindness. It is the shadow side of care, the dark twin of compassion, the smile that enslaves instead of frees. Few recognize it, for we are conditioned to trust kindness, to surrender before it, to assume it is safe. But what if safety itself is the trap? I recall the story of a woman who came to me not with bruises on her skin, but with fractures in her voice. Her husband, she said, loved her too much. He brought her gifts. He checked on her every moment. He made every decision for her own good. At first, she felt blessed. Then she felt confined. And soon she realized she no longer had a life, only a prison with flowers on its walls. The scent of roses filled her home, but beneath the perfume lingered the odor of suffocation. She was not free. She was consumed by sweetness, turned to venom. Modern psychology now gives names to what she endured: coercive control, pathological dependency, the weaponization of care. Neuroscience shows us that oxytocin, the very hormone of love and trust, can become a leash when manipulated. Victims often remain loyal to their abusers not out of fear, but out of misplaced gratitude, as though chains wrapped in velvet were not chains at all. Science explains the mechanics, but Jung had already spoken of the archetype. When care fuses with shadow, the result is possession by a mask that looks like love but breathes destruction. The ancients were not blind to this paradox. In Homer's tales, the lotus offered sweetness that enslaved sailors in forgetful bliss. In Christian scripture, the serpent approached Eve not with a threat, but with a gift, a promise of wisdom wrapped in honeyed words. In Buddhist texts, Mara does not terrify seekers with horror, but lulls them into comfort, the seduction of sleep over. Again and again the message appears: beware of sweetness, for sometimes it conceals the... And how does one recognize the venom? The signs are subtle, almost invisible: protection that feels suffocating, attention that erases your independence, affection that demands obedience in return, smiles that feel a fraction too heavy, words of love that echo with a hidden demand. These are not acts of compassion. They are acts of control clothed in care. By the time you notice, the venom has already seeped into your veins. This is why consciousness is the only defense. To trust blindly is to walk willingly into the cage. To awaken is to strip the mask from kindness and ask, does this free me or does it bind me? Jung would insist that individuation requires this brutal clarity to discern not only the shadow in hatred, but the shadow in love, the destruction hidden within devotion. For the enemy is not always the one who shouts. Sometimes the enemy is the one who whispers, I only want what is best for you. And so I ask you, as I asked myself many times when facing the depths of the unconscious, when kindness surrounds you, do you feel nourished? Do you feel trapped? Does it expand your being, or does it shrink it? Does it heal, or does it infect? The answers may terrify you, but to ignore them is to surrender your soul to the most insidious archetype of all, the sweetness that burns, the care that kills, the bondade venenosa. Every prison is built with walls, some of stone, some of iron, but the most terrifying prisons are built with gestures of kindness, words of devotion, promises, protection. They do not appear as cells, but as gardens. Their walls are painted with flowers, their air perfumed with sweetness. Yet within them the soul suffocates. This is the paradox of toxic kindness. It enslaves while it embraces. It devours while it smiles. In my years of study, I met a man whose wife wept not from violence, but from love. He never struck her, never shouted, never betrayed. And yet, she said, I cannot breathe. His affection was constant, relentless. He monitored her health, her friend. Every gesture was framed as care. I only want what's best. As he erased, she was not chained by cruelty, she was chained by devotion, turned into... The room was filled with roses, but their thorns pierced her soul. Psychologists now describe this as a form of control, the subtle domination where the victim appears cherished, but is actually consumed. Neuroscience shows how dependency circuits in the brain are activated, flooding the victim with chemicals that confuse possession with love. They begin to feel guilty for wanting freedom, as though freedom itself were betrayal. It is a paradox the ancients understood long before MRI machines. The sweetest poison is the one we drink willingly, believing it to be medicine. The myths echo this truth. In the Greek tale, the sirens do not attack with claws or teeth. They sing. Their voices are beautiful, irresistible, promising joy. Sailors leap to their deaths not from fear, but from longing. In Christian scripture, Judas betrays with a kiss, not with a sword. In Buddhism, Mara tempts Siddhartha, not with violence, but with illusions of comfort and beauty. Again and again, the warning is the same. Beware when kindness becomes a cage, when affection masks erasure. The signs of this prison are subtle, but they accumulate like cracks in glass. You find yourself apologizing for desiring space. You feel guilty for wanting solitude. You hesitate before speaking, wondering if your words will hurt the one who claims to love you. Your world shrinks. Friends fade. Dreams dissolve. You are told it is for your protection, for your happiness, but in truth your being is being consumed, bite by invisible bite. Jung would have called this possession by an archetype, not the archetype of the tyrant, obvious and brutal, but the archetype of the devouring mother, the shadow of care that smothers instead of nourishes. He warned that love, when fused with shadow, becomes indistinguishable from domination. The soul that submits too easily to such care is not cared for at all. It is erased. Modern science confirms this paradox in relationships marked by traumatic bonding. Victims of toxic kindness often defend their abusers passionately, unable to separate love from control. Their nervous systems have been trained to see restriction as safety, surveillance as devotion. What looks insane from the outside feels natural from within. And thus the prison grows stronger, for its bars are invisible, even to those trapped in. But the prison is not confined to individuals. Families, communities, even nations can fall into the same trap. Leaders who promise endless protection, who claim to love the people so much they must control every aspect of their life. At first it feels safe, then it feels soft, and finally it collapses into tyranny wrapped in the language of care. History records the ruins of nations that mistook surveillance for love, obedience for harmony, possession for protection. How then can one recognize the flowers that conceal? The body knows before the mind does. A tightening in the chest when the caring fear enters, a fatigue that lingers after conversations filled with concern, a sense of shrinking as though the walls have closed a fraction tighter. These are not illusions, they are alarms, but most silence them, too afraid to doubt the kindness that imprisons. And here lies the most terrifying truth. Sometimes the prison is not built by others, but by ourselves. Out of fear of abandonment, we overprotect those we love. Out of guilt, we smother rather than support. Out of insecurity, we offer help that bind instead of frees. We become jailers without knowing, offering flowers that hide chains. This is the shadow Jung, the venom we carry within, disguised. So ask yourself, does your kindness give life, or does it drain it? Do your gestures expand the freedom of others, or do they narrow it in the name of care? To ignore these questions is to risk becoming both prisoner and jailer, trapped in a cycle where affection becomes venom, and the walls of the soul are lined with roses that cut deeper than swords. Not every danger enters with teeth bared. Sometimes it enters with a smile. The archetype of venomous kindness is most lethal, not in its obvious forms, but in its invisible one. It does not strike the body, it infiltrates it reshapes perception until the victim mistakes the cage for sanctuary, the leash for an embrace. These are the signs of its presence, the small fraction reality that once widen into abysses. The first sign is care that suffocates. On the surface, it appears noble. Someone checks on you constantly. Your health insists you eat. But beneath the sweetness is surveillance. You no longer breathe freely, for every breath is monitored, judged. You are not. A mother's embrace can nourish, but if she never lets go, it becomes a stranglehold. Jung recognized as the devouring mother, love twisted into consumption. The second sign is guilt disguised as gratitude. You begin to feel indebted to the one who showers you with gestures of kindness. Each gift, each favor, becomes a chain. After all I've done for you, they say, and suddenly your autonomy feels gratitude. The purest of virtues has been weaponized into submission. The victim apologizes for wanting freedom, as though freedom were selfish. This is no longer love. It is debt collection with flowers on the invoice. The third sign is silence heavy with sweetness. Not every weapon is a word. Sometimes it is the absence of words. You hesitate before expressing your needs, afraid to hurt the one who claims to love you. Their kindness is so overwhelming, so constant, that any resistance feels cruel. You learn to remain quiet, to swallow your truth. But silence in the name of kindness is not harmony. It is corrosion. It eats away at the soul like rust, hidden beneath gold. The fourth sign is erasure disguised as protection. You are told not to pursue certain dreams because it's too risky. You are asked not to see certain people because they don't understand you. Each restriction is framed as safety, each boundary cloaked in care. And yet, step by step, your life, the world that once expanded now contracts until it fits entirely within the orbit of the one who claims to love you. This is not protection. It is consumption, the slow digestion of your being. And the fifth, most dangerous sign, the smile that conceals. It is difficult to describe, but unmistakable when felt. A smile that radiates warmth yet leaves the air cold. A gesture of care that makes your chest tighten instead of relax. A voice that soothes while your instincts scream. Neuroscience calls it micro-expression. Myth calls it enchantment. Jung would call it the mask of the archetype, the persona worn by chaos when it wants to pass unnoticed. It is the moment when the unconscious recognizes the predator behind the smile, even if the conscious mind refuses to. Modern science only confirms what these signs reveal. Studies on emotional abuse show that the most damaging forms of control are not violent but affectionate. Victims of kind abusers often take longer to escape than those facing open cruelty. The brain, conditioned to equate affection with safety, cannot reconcile the contradiction, and so the victim stays, rationalizing, excusing, believing that suffocation is love. But the archetype is already feeding. Ancient traditions warned us long before research did. The lotus eaters of Homer's Odyssey lived in bliss, but their bliss was bondage. The Trojan horse entered not as a weapon, but as a gift. Even fairy tales whisper the truth. Snow White is nearly killed not by sword or fire, but by a poisoned apple, sweet to the taste, lethal to the core. The deadliest danger has always been sweetness turned to venom. These signs, suffocating care, weaponized gratitude, silencing sweetness, erasure through protection, the smile that conceals hunger, are not isolated. They weave together, forming a net that tightens with every passing. The victim may not notice the strands at first, but one morning they wake and realize they no longer belong. Their choices are not their own. Their life has been rewritten in the language of someone else's kindness. The cruelest aspect of this venom is how it convinces the victim to defend it. They love me. They only want to help. To outside, control may seem obvious. To the one trapped inside, the prison still smells of. This is why Jung insisted that awareness is the only weapon strong enough to cut through the spell. To name the pattern is to begin escaping it. To deny it is to let it devour you whole. So ask yourself, when kindness surrounds you, do you feel larger or smaller? Do you feel free or confined? Do you breathe deeply, or do you struggle for air while smiling through the suffocation? These questions are not comfortable. They are dangerous. But to avoid them is to remain in the arms of an archetype that smiles while it feeds. For in the theater of the psyche, cruelty wounds the body, but toxic kindness devours the soul. And souls consumed do not scream. They simply fall silent, their voices dissolved in a smile that was never truly theirs. No one swallows poison knowingly. The most dangerous toxins enter slowly, hidden in sweetness, until the body cannot tell healing from harm. The archetype of venomous kindness works in the same way. It does not appear overnight, fully formed. It unfolds in stages, each more subtle, each more corrosive, until the victim awakens to find themselves consumed. Jung taught that archetypes move like tides, not storm. They rise gently, and by the time the flood is visible, it is already too late. The first stage is the gift. It begins with generosity that feels almost supernatural. Flowers arrive unasked. Compliments flow like rivers. The victim feels seen, valued, cherished in a way they have longed for. This is the bait, and like all bait, it is designed to disarm. Gratitude overwhelms suspicion. The gift, however, is never just a gift. It is the seed of obligation. The second stage is the net of attention. Every detail of the victim's life is observed, noted, commented on. You should eat more. You look tired. Why don't you let me handle that for you? At first it feels like devotion. Then slowly it becomes autonomy erodes under the weight of constant care. the victim begins to doubt their ability to function without such guidance. Dependency grows like ivy, wrapping tighter each day. The third stage, protection that improves. Here, kindness reveals its shadow more clearly. Don't go there. It's not safe. Don't talk to them. They don't really care about you. Don't try that. You'll only get hurt. Each phrase is framed as concern, but in truth it is control. The victim's world shrinks. Their horizons narrow. The once expansive sky becomes a ceiling. They are told it is for their own good, but it is their wings being clipped. The fourth stage is the debt of love. Now every act of kindness becomes a currency. After all I've done for you, the figure says, and suddenly freedom feels like betrayal. Gratitude, once pure, has been twisted into chains. The victim stays, not because they want to, but because leaving would mean abandoning the one who sacrificed so much. It is a contract signed in invisible ink, binding not through law but through guilt. The fifth stage is the erasure of self. The victim begins to speak less, to dream less, to live less. Their identity becomes secondary to the one who cares for them. They stop making decisions. They stop asking questions. They stop existing as individuals. This is not love. It is absorption. Like sugar dissolving in water, they lose their shape, their taste, their essence, until nothing remains but the sweetness that consumed them. The final stage is possession. At this point, the archetype of venomous kindness no longer needs to act. The victim has internalized its voice. They censor themselves before being censored. They obey before being commanded. They carry the jailer within, whispering, "This is for your own good." Jung described possession as the eclipse of the ego by an archetype. Here the ego is no longer a self, but a shadow, orbiting another's false. The poison has become the bloodstream. This progression is not only psychological, it is historical, cultural, even spiritual. Families fall into it. Communities fall into it. Nations fall into it. Leaders rise not with threats, with promises of care. We will protect you. We will give you safety. We will take the burden of freedom from your shoulders. At first the people feel blessed. Then they feel contained. Finally, they are possessed by a kindness that devours liberty. The ancients warned of these stages in their myths. The Trojan horse was not a weapon at the gate. It was a gift. The sirens did not attack sailors with claws. They sang. In fairy tales, the wicked stepmother offers fruit, not fire. Poisoned kindness has always been more dangerous than open cruelty because cruelty is visible, while sweetness blinds. Modern science has mapped this progression too. Psychologists describe trauma bonding, the cycle of reward and restriction that deepens attachment even as it erodes freedom. Neuroscientists show how intermittent reinforcement, the alternation of warmth and withdrawal, creates dependency stronger than any chain. What myths called enchantment, science calls conditioning. But the result is the same. The victim is bound, and so the stages unfold. Gift, net, prison, debt, erasure, possession, a ritual as old as humanity, repeated in bedrooms and boardrooms, in temples and nations. To recognize the stages is to interrupt them. To deny them is to live their full horror. So I ask you, in your life, which stage has touched you? Did you mistake the gift for love? Did you confuse the net for devotion? Are you still inside the prison, calling it protection? Or have you already begun to erase yourself, smiling through suffocation, defending the very kindness consumes you? To answer these questions is to risk terror. To avoid them is to invite ruin. For the sweetness of poisoned kindness is patient. It does not. It unfolds stage by stage until the soul is no longer a soul, but a reflection of the archetype that feeds upon it. The most dangerous archetypes are never content to remain in the private theater of a single soul. They seep outward, infecting families, communities, nations. The archetype of venomous kindness spreads like a fragrance too sweet, clinging to everything. What begins as a single embrace that suffocates one person soon becomes a cultural climate where entire groups mistake control for care, obedience for love, and captivity for safety. I once observed a family where every decision was framed as love. The father insisted that his children pursue only certain careers for their own good. The mother dictated friendships, clothing, even gestures, always claiming it was to protect them. On the surface, this family looked harmonious. No shouting, no overt cruelty, no fractures visible to outsiders. But inside, each child grew hollow, stripped of choice, their individuality consumed by parental devotion. They smiled in photographs, but their eyes revealed a silence deeper than words. The archetype had taken possession of the household, building a shrine to control disguised as love. This is not rare. Entire family systems normalize suffocation as devotion. Siblings who rebel are branded ungrateful. Children who seek freedom are accused of betrayal. Parents claim sacrifice while feeding on obedience. Here, kindness is no longer an act. It is a currency. The price of affection is submission. And generation after generation, the poison is passed down like inheritance until no one remembers the difference between care and consumption. Communities fall into the same trap. Religious groups, for example, often frame control as compassion. We restrict you because we love you. We discipline you because we care for your soul. Followers accept the cage because it is lined with velvet words. They wear their chains as badges of honor, convinced that surrender is devotion. Jung warned that collective possession begins this way, when archetypal forces are cloaked in sacred language, and individuals no longer question the sweetness that numbs them. History is full of nations seduced not by cruelty, but by promises of care. Leaders rise declaring, "We will protect you, we will provide for you, we will love you as no ruler has loved you before." At first, the people rejoice, feel safe, cherished, guided. Then, little by little, freedoms dissolve, surveillance spreads, obedience becomes law. Dissent is cast not as treason, but as ingratitude. Citizens defend their own shackles, insisting they are gifts, and by the time they realize they are prisoners, the prison has become the nation itself. Ancient texts foresaw this pattern. In the Bible, the people of Israel often begged for kings to protect them, only to find themselves enslaved by the very rulers they trusted. In Greek myth, the people of Troy welcomed the horse as a gift, only to be destroyed by what it concealed. In Buddhist teachings, Mara tempts communities with comfort, ensuring they fall asleep rather than awaken. These are not stories of the past. They are mirrors of the present. Modern science describes the same phenomenon under new names. Social psychologists speak of dependency cultures, where individuals surrender autonomy to authority in exchange for security. Neuroscientists show how fear makes people more likely to accept control when it is framed as protection. Even political theorists warn that the most enduring tyrannies are those cloaked in benevolence. What myth calls archetype, science calls conditioning. Both describe the same abyss. And what are the signs of collective poisoned kindness? They are as subtle as they are terrifying. Families where no one raises their voice, but where silence is heavier than screams. Communities where every smile conceals obedience. Nations where people say, "We are safe," while their freedoms vanish. The poison does not announce itself with violence. It seeps into culture until it feels natural, even righteous. The greatest danger of all is that people begin to defend their captors. The child insists their parents only wanted the best. Their leaders only cared for their souls. The citizen insists the state only wanted to protect. And thus the archetype thrives, not in resistance, in gratitude, not in rebellion. Jung once wrote that archetypes gain power when they remain unconscious, and here, in collective poisoned kindness, unconscious. So ask yourself, where in your world does kindness conceal control? Where does care erase freedom? Where does love mask domination? These questions are not abstract. They determine whether your family, your community, your nation lives in truth or in shadow. For the archetype of venomous kindness does not stop at one victim. It spreads until entire societies defend the poison that consumes them. And when a culture escape is no longer an individual act, it becomes a rebellion, a revolution, an awakening against a sweetness that has numbed the collective soul. Few dare such defiance. Most stay silent, smiling through suffocation. But silence, as always, is the nourishment of the archetype. The most dangerous predators do not roar. They smile. They whisper. They linger in silence long enough for you to doubt your own unease. The archetype of venomous kindness never reveals itself directly. It moves in shadows, in subtleties, in invisible markers that most dismiss as nothing. But Jung warned that the psyche always knows before the conscious mind admits. The body trembles before the ego understands. If you learn to read these signs, you may survive. If you ignore them, you may already be consumed. The first marker is the gaze that clings too long. On the surface, it looks affectionate, attentive, even admiring, but beneath it is a weight, a hunger. You feel observed, measured, possessed. It is not the warmth of recognition. It is the surveillance of ownership. Neuroscientists call it the overstimulation of mirror neuron. Myth calls it the evil eye. Jung would call it the mask slipping, the archetype peeking through the human face. The eyes always betray what the words conceal. The second marker is the silence that swallows truth. Not every lie is spoken. Sometimes it is allowed to rot in the air, unchallenged. In the presence of venomous kindness, questions remain unanswered. Doubts are met with affectionate silence. It feels like peace, but it is paralysis. This silence spreads like fog, muffling instinct, choking resistance. Families sink into it. Workplaces suffocate it. Entire nations submit to it. Silence is not absent as weapon. The third marker is the gift that demands obedience. It is offered with a smile, a gesture of love, flowers, favors, sacrifice, but the price arrives later, disguised as gratitude. After all I've done for you. This is the hook. True kindness frees, poisoned kindness binds. Every gift becomes a thread until the victim is tangled in a net woven of devotion. The ancients warned us, and apple, the cursed necklace, the Trojan. What looks like blessing may be the first sign of ruin. The fourth marker, the shrinking space. At first, a suggestion not to see certain friends, a request to avoid certain places. It's only because I care, but soon the world narrows. The victim feels safer, but also smaller. Their choices dissolve. Their independence contracts. The walls of their existence close in, decorated with flowers, but still walls. This contraction is the fingerprint of the archetype. Jung knew it well. The psyche under possession always narrows, loses diversity, collapses into monotony. Life itself becomes one-dimensional, orbiting the figure who claims to protect. The fifth marker is the smile that does not match the atmosphere. It is bright, polished, warm, and yet something in the air chills. The body reacts before the mind can explain. Goosebumps, a tightening of the stomach, a sudden fatigue. Modern psychology might call it a cognitive dissonance, but the ancients called it enchantment, the moment when beauty conceals venom. This smile is the mask of chaos itself, the sugar that disguises the poison. Together these markers form a pattern. Alone they can be dismissed. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the psyche does not lie. Each marker is a whisper from the unconscious. Danger. And the tragedy is that most victims silence this whisper, choosing to trust the mask rather than their own instinct. Jung insisted that ignoring the unconscious is the root of neurosis. Here, ignoring the unconscious may be the root of destruction. Consider how these signs appear in history. Leaders who gaze too long at their citizens, watching with eyes of devotion, but hungering for obedience. Movements that cloak silence in slogans of harmony, demanding that no dissent disturb the peace. Nations showered with gifts, welfare, promises, protections, that later demand obedience. The shrinking of the narrowing of the smile of leaders whose warmth feels colder than stone. The archetype of venomous kindness has always worn these markers. We simply rename them in each generation. Science itself cannot measure these subtleties, yet it confirms them. Emotional abuse studies show that victims often cannot point to a single violent act, but describe atmospheres, glances, silences that eroded them over time. The nervous system detects threats before the conscious mind. Instinct becomes the first alarm. The problem is not detection, but denial. Victims know, but they do not want to. And so, the archetype thrives in the gap between awareness and acknowledgement. To see these markers requires courage, for once seen, they cannot be unseen. You will never look at a smile the same way again. You will never hear silence without suspicion. You will never receive a gift without asking what it conceals. This is the price of consciousness, to live without the comfort of innocence. But it is also the only shield against the archetype. So I leave you with this. when the gaze lingers too long, when silence grows too heavy, when gifts arrive with invisible strings, when your world begins to shrink and the smile feels colder in the air. Trust the unease. The archetype has already entered, and once it enters, it does not leave willingly. When the archetype of venomous kindness coils around you, instinct alone is not enough. Awareness must sharpen into strategy, or else the sweetness will dissolve your will before you realize it has happened. Jung warned that archetypes cannot be destroyed, only integrated or resisted. To face the poisoned kindness that suffocates rather than nourishes, you must learn the art of survival, not through confrontation alone, but through discipline of the soul. The first rule is awareness as armor. You must see clearly even when others beg you to look away. The smile may dazzle, the gift may tempt, the silence may feel like peace, but you must name what you see. This is not love. This is control. To call it by its true name is to pierce the spell. Awareness transforms fog into map, confusion into pattern. Every journal entry, every recollection of contradiction, every whispered doubt recorded is a shield, for chaos feeds on forgetfulness. To remember is to resist. The second rule is boundaries as fortress. Venomous kindness tests limits with infinite patience. It begins with small requests, tiny sacrifices, subtle erasures. If you bend once, it bends you again. If you hesitate, it consumes further. The only defense is a wall drawn firm and immediate. Say no when no is required. Do not explain endless. Do not defend your right to breathe. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival lines. Jung called individuation the drawing of a sacred circle around the self. Without that circle, the archetype enters freely. The third rule is retreat as weapon. The ego craves confrontation, but confrontation with archetypal forces often feeds them. Venomous kindness thrives on entanglement, on pulling you deeper into its logic. Sometimes the strongest act is to step back, withdraw energy, create distance. The ancients knew this well. Monks retreated to deserts not from weakness, but from wisdom. Warriors in Asia practiced strategic withdrawal as the highest form of mastery. To walk away is not surrender. It is survival through clarity. The fourth rule is silence as shield. The poisoned smile seeks reaction. It craves your explanation, your guilt, your endless defense. Not offer it. In silence, you reclaim your power. Silence is not passivity. It is refusal to feed the web. Let the manipulator's words hang unanswered. Let their kindness, once denied the oxygen of your response, reveal its emptiness. Silence, held with consciousness, is sharper than argument. The fifth rule is allies as mirror. Venomous kindness thrives in isolation, convincing you that your doubts are madness. Alone, you will question yourself until the poison rewrites your mind. But with trusted allies, the fog lifts. Share what you see. Speak the contradictions aloud. Let others reflect your reality back to you. This is not weakness. It is survival. Science confirms it. The nervous system regulates in the presence of trust. Myth confirms it. Heroes never defeat monsters alone. They carry allies who speak truth when enchantment threatens to blind them. The sixth and final rule is inner work as sword. You cannot fight poisoned kindness outside if you do not confront it inside. Jung insisted that every shadow we refuse to face within will appear outside as fate. Ask yourself, in what ways do you smother others with care? In what ways do you bind rather than free, even while claiming love? Unless you integrate this shadow, you will forever be vulnerable to those who embody it. The enemy without is strengthened by the enemy within. Only by illuminating your own devouring tendencies can you resist those who weaponize them against you. These are not comfortable rules. They are not simple. They demand courage sharper than any blade. They demand solitude when the crowd insists on silence. They demand clarity when the heart longs for comfort, but they are necessary. Without them, the sweetness will consume you, and you will defend your own destruction with gratitude. Think of the times you stayed silent when the gift felt heavy, when the smile chilled, and the care suffocated. Think of the times you apologized for wanting freedom. Each was a moment when the archetype pressed against your soul, searching for a crack. The protocol is how you seal those cracks, how you preserve yourself in a world where chaos wears a mask of devotion. For let me tell you this, the archetype of venomous kindness is eternal. It will appear in partners, in families, in leaders, in nations. It will whisper with the same voice, I only want what's best. And many will bow, many will obey, many will call their prison love. But you, if you are vigilant, if you practice the protocol, may yet stand, perhaps trembling, perhaps wounded, but standing. And in that stance, fragile yet unbroken, lies the only true defiance, consciousness, to see the venom behind the sweetness, to recognize the prison behind the flowers, to choose freedom even when it feels like betrayal. That is the survival protocol. That is the torch you must carry through the labyrinth. There comes a moment when resistance is no longer enough. You may set boundaries, retreat, hold silence, call upon allies, and still the archetype of venomous kindness lingers in the air like smoke. Why? Because the greatest danger is not outside. It is within. Jung warned us that what we refuse to confront in ourselves will always return in the world around us. The devouring smile you fear may not only belong to another, it may also belong to you. This is the paradox. Every virtue carries a shadow. Love becomes possession. Care becomes control. Devotion becomes erasure. What begins as light inevitably casts darkness. The archetype of venomous kindness is not merely a predator we encounter. It is a mirror of our own unacknowledged hunger to bind others, to shape them, to protect them until they suffocate. The line between savior and jailer is thinner than we dare to admit. I recall a patient, a mother, who wept as she confessed that she could not stop herself from controlling her daughter's life. I love her. I can't let her fail. I can't let her hurt. I can't let her be free. Her daughter, in turn, was withering, silent, living in a golden cage. The tragedy was not malice. It was love twisted into venom by fear. The mother did not see herself as oppressor. She saw herself as protector. But in the shadow of protection, possession bloomed. Modern psychology calls this. Neuroscience shows how trauma shapes the brain to confuse control with love, making one repeat with others what one once endured. Science frames it clinically, but Jung named it soul, the possession of the archetype. When care fuses with shadow, the result is bondage disguised as compassion. The ancients encoded this paradox in their myths. In Greek tragedy, Medea kills her children out of love, twisted into vengeance. In Christian scripture, Peter swears to protect Christ, yet his very insistence becomes denial. In Buddhism, clinging, even to what is good, is seen as the root of suffering. Again and again, the wisdom traditions whisper, the shadow hides in virtue more easily than in vice. The devil does not come only with threats. He also comes with promises of love, and so the confrontation must turn inward. Ask yourself, how do you smother others with your affection? How do you erase their autonomy while believing you are saving them? How often does your care hide fear, insecurity, or hunger for control? These questions are not comfortable. They are dangerous, but they are the only path to freedom, for the one who denies their own venom will always fall victim to it in another. Integration does not mean embracing cruelty. It means acknowledging your own capacity for poisoned kindness so that you may wield love consciously without shadow. It means holding the paradox that true care is both presence and distance, both devotion and release. To love is to let others breathe, even if their choices terrify. To protect is to give space, not to build cages. Anything else is possession. Philosophers understood this long before psychology. The Stoics warned against overprotection, calling it a distortion of reason. The Taoists spoke of wu wei, effortless action, guiding without suffocating. In Christianity, Christ himself let the rich young ruler walk away, refusing to coerce even when truth was. All wisdom converges. Real love liberates, false love imprisons. The archetype of venomous kindness feeds on the latter. But to live this truth demands courage, for it is easier to control than to trust, easier to smother than to release, easier to bind than to watch someone walk away. Yet Jung reminds us, Individuation, the full realization of the self, comes only through embracing paradox. You must see both the light and its shadow, both the gift and its poison. Only then can you love without chains, care without erasure, protect without possession. And so the paradox stands: kindness saves, and kindness kills. Care heals, and care corrodes. Devotion uplifts, and devotion devours. The question is not whether kindness will appear in your life, but what form it will take. Will you wield it as light, or will it wield you as shadow? This is the abyss you must face, the recognition that the prison with flowers on its walls may not always be built by others. Sometimes your own hands hold the hammer, even as you call it love. To see this is to risk despair. To deny it is to guarantee destruction. But to integrate it, to say, yes, this too is in me, is to begin the only path toward conscious love. For in the end, the archetype of venomous kindness cannot be destroyed. It can only be seen, acknowledged, and transformed. The poison does not but awareness changes its taste. What once enslaved can become a teacher. What once devoured can become integrated. And only then can kind, stripped of venom, become what it was meant to be: freedom. What imprisons one person can also imprison millions. The archetype of venomous kindness is not confined to the private intimacy of families or the silent manipulations of relationships. It scales, it spreads, it infects, and when it does, the cost is written not in broken hearts, but in ruins, in civilizations that collapse, while still insisting they are protected by love. History is heavy with these poisoned embraces. Consider the empire that promises its citizens security, feeding them bread and spectacle, claiming it does so out of devotion. Rome, in its final centuries, wrapped its people in paternal care, distracting them with gifts, while stripping them of voice, autonomy, and meaning. Citizens applauded their own imprisonment, grateful for the poisoned sweetness of stability. By the time the collapse came, the people were too intoxicated to resist. Or think of Germany in the early 20th century, a humiliated nation, wounded, desperate for care. Into this vacuum stepped a leader who offered not cruelty at first, but comfort, restoration, pride, protection. He wrapped his promises in devotion to the fatherland, presenting himself not as tyrant, but as guardian. And millions followed, not because they feared him, but because they trusted his poisoned kindness. The result was catastrophe on a scale that scarred the human soul forever. The ancients warned us of this archetypal possession. The Greeks told of the Trojan horse, a gift of concealed destruction. The Hebrews begged for kings to protect them, only to be enslaved by the very rulers they adored. Even the myth of Pandora's container, filled with blessing, yet laced with curses that would spread through humanity. The collective psyche has always known that sweetness can kill, that benevolence can mask the abyss. Modern science now frames these collapses in clinical language. Political theorists call it paternal authoritarianism, when rulers expand control by presenting themselves as protectors. Sociologists speak of dependency cultures, where populations exchange freedom for care. Neuroscientists show how fear primes the brain to accept restriction when it feels wrapped in safety. Yet for all its sterile precision, science only confirms what myth and Jung had already seen. The archetype of venomous kindness is not only real, it is recurrent. The markers are unmistakable. Nations begin with promises: we will provide, we will protect, we will love you as no ruler has been. Citizens cheer. Then comes the narrowing of space. Fewer choices, fewer voices, fewer freedoms, all cloaked in the rhetoric. Silence grows. Dissent becomes ingratitude. The state declares, after all we have done for you, betray us. The people defend their own chains, believing them gifts. By the time the mask slips, the poison has already spread through the bloodstream of the nation. But this is not confined to politics. Religious movements have followed the prophets' promise salvation, but only through absolute obedience. We restrict you because we love you. We demand your loyalty because we care for your soul. Followers mistake control for devotion. They defend leaders who smother them, claiming their bondage is blessing. Jung saw this dynamic clearly. Collective possession is always strongest when cloaked in moral or spiritual language. Evil rarely calls itself evil, it calls itself love. What makes the archetype so devastating at the collective level is that it convinces entire societies to silence their instinct. Individuals may feel unease, but the crowd reassures them. The poisonous smile becomes normal when millions reflect it back. The silence becomes natural when no one dares speak. The prison with flowers on its walls becomes invisible when the entire nation decorates it together. And yet the cycle repeats. Rome falls, empires crumble, tyrannies collapse. Every society that embraces poisoned kindness eventually discovers its cost. History does not move in straight lines. It circles like the wheel Jung described, swinging between order and chaos shadow. The archetype of venomous kindness is one face of that wheel, inevitable, recurrent, seductive. So where does that leave us today? Look around. Nations promising safety above freedom, communities silencing dissent in the name of harmony, families erasing individuality in the name of love. The same signs whisper again, as they always do, and most refuse to. The sweetness is too comforting to question. But the question cannot be avoided. How much freedom are we willing to surrender in the name of care? How much individuality are we willing to erase in the name of love? At what point does the embrace become a stranglehold? Jung would remind us the archetype cannot be erased, but it can be recognized. To see the poisoned kindness of a nation, a movement, a leader, is already an act of resistance. To refuse to drink the honeyed poison, even when millions do, is the beginning of individuation, not only for the self, but for the collective. For in the end, civilizations do not collapse because of cruelty alone. They collapse because of kindness turned venom, devotion turned bondage, protection turned prison. The archetype whispers the same promise in every age. We love you, trust us, obey us. And every age, blinded by sweetness, risks drinking until it is too late. In the end, there are no chains left to break, no cages left to shatter, no prisons left to flee. For the most terrifying truth of the archetype of venomous kindness is that it does not vanish when the jailer is gone. It remains within you, a voice learned, a smile remembered, a silence absorbed. The archetype does not only enslave you in the present, it rewrites your future, shaping the way you give and receive love. The flowers on the prison walls continue to bloom long after you have escaped. Jung taught us that archetypes are eternal forms, forces that outlive individuals and civilizations. The archetype of venomous kindness is one of the most insidious because it wears the mask of virtue. Evil cloaked as cruelty can be resisted. Evil cloaked as kindness seduces even the strongest. And so, history repeats itself. Families, lovers, nations fall again and again into the same trap, defending the hand that strangles them because it caresses at the same time. The danger is not only to be consumed by poisoned kindness, the danger is to become its vessel. Many who escape its prison carry its patterns with them, passing them on to children, partners, communities. They say they want to protect, but they smother. They say they want to care, but they bind. They say they want to love, but their love demands obedience. The victim becomes the jailer. The archetype reproduces itself not through blood, but through behavior. And thus the wheel turns. Science explains this cycle with words like trauma, conditioning, intergenerational pattern. But beneath the sterile language lies a spiritual truth. What is not integrated in the soul is repeated. Jung insisted that the shadow must be faced, not denied. If you refuse to see your own capacity for poisoned kindness, you will pass it on to your children, to your community, to your society. This is the true legacy of unconsciousness. Ancient wisdom warned us in parables. The serpent in Eden did not force its fruit into Eve's mouth. It offered. The danger was not the threat, but the invitation. In the myth of the sirens, sailors were not dragged into the sea by chains. They leapt willingly, intoxicated by. Even in the New Testament, Judas betrayed not with a dagger, but with a kiss. The archetype has always hidden in gestures of affection, in masks of care. What myth encoded psychology confirms. Kindness is the perfect disguise for chaos. And so the question remains, how do we live knowing that every act of love may carry its shadow, that every gesture of care may conceal the seed of control, that every embrace may tighten into a noose? The answer is not despair, it is vigilance. To love consciously, to care without erasing, to give without binding, to protect without suffocating, to walk the razor's edge between devotion and domination, with awareness as your only guide. But vigilance demands courage. Courage to ask yourself, when I love, do I free or do I imprison? When I care, do I heal or do I consume? When I smile, do I nourish or do I bind? These questions cut deep, but without them, you will become the very archetype you fear. The final warning is this: the archetype of venomous kindness cannot be eradicated. It will appear again and again in partners, in families, in leaders, in nations. It is eternal, but it can be seen. And in being seen, its spell weakens. Consciousness is the only antidote to poisoned love. Not innocence, not denial, consciousness. So when you encounter the sweet smile that chills the air, the silence that suffocates, the gift that binds, protection that erases, remember, you are staring into the abyss of one of the most dangerous archetypes of the human soul. Do not excuse, do not romanticize, do not defend it. For every time you say, "They only wanted the best for me," you lace the chains tighter. Instead, stand. Even trembling, even wounded, even alone, stand. For to recognize the prison is to step outside it, to name the poison, to spit it out, to face the shadow is to rob it of its grip. Jung's voice echoes here, stern and prophetic. The greatest burden a man can bear, to become conscious of himself. This is the burden, to see the venom behind the kindness, to hold the paradox without fleeing, to love with awareness, not with shadow. Few will accept this burden, most will surrender to the sweetness. But those who carry it will walk through the ruins of poisoned kindness with a torch that does not. And so I leave you with this final truth. The archetype of venomous kindness is not defeated in others. It is defeated in yourself. And only then can your love be love, your care be freedom. Anything less is poison. Anything less is shadow.